Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to express my deep concerns with the nuclear agreement negotiated between the United States, other world powers, and Iran. In May, Congress acted in a bipartisan way to enact the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act. The Senate passed the legislation 98-1, and the House passed it 400-25. The bill was signed into law by our president, President Obama. This critically important legislation provides Congress, as the representatives of the American people, the ability to examine and vote on an agreement that will have tremendous impact on the future security of the Middle East and the world. When the Senate passed the legislation in May, I said that the bill would allow Congress to hold the administration accountable for negotiating an enforceable and verifiable agreement that would stop Iran's progress towards a nuclear weapon. Negotiators have completed their work. Review of the agreement is underway. Committees are holding important hearings. We had one this morning. And after the August recess, Congress will have the opportunity to vote on a resolution that approves or disapproves of the deal reached with Iran. I believe that this agreement is flawed in several ways. First, the agreement fails to provide for an inspections regime that is strong enough to prevent Iran from fulfilling its nuclear ambitions. Any agreement with Iran should include rigorous and immediate inspections of suspected nuclear sites. There has been much talk and hope of an anywhere, anytime inspection regime. But anywhere, anytime inspections are not what this agreement provides. Instead, under this agreement, it could take 24 days or much, much longer. And under the Joint Commission process could be potentially much longer before inspectors have access to a suspected nuclear site. It's obvious that Iran could hide elements of a nuclear program, such as the construction of centrifuges, before inspectors could ever gain access to a suspected nuclear site. Already, Iran has failed to meet the transparency requirements of the Interim Joint Plan of Action. The International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, consistently warned of Iran's failure to meet those standards of full transparency in its June 2015 report, which stated, quote, "The agency remains concerned about the possible existence in Iran of undisclosed nuclear-related activities involving military-related organizations, including activities related to the development of a nuclear payload for a missile," end quote. Given Iran's lack of transparency, I believe the content of this agreement does not contain strong enough mechanisms to prevent Iran's clandestine development of a nuclear weapon. Second, I find it more troubling that Congress, or even the administration, has not been given access to the understanding between Iran and the IAEA regarding how Iran's compliance with the agreement will be implemented. This has been the subject of great discussion. Third, I am concerned that the agreement will provide Iran with financial resources that they could use to continue to fund terrorist groups that put Americans and our allies at risk. We know they're doing it in the past. We know of their desire to do it in the future. It is troubling that when the sanctions against Iran are lifted, the nation will immediately receive approximately $150 billion in assets. As a designated state sponsor of terrorism for over 30 years, Iran has funded proxy wars across the region. These wars range from Shia Muslims in Iraq to Houthi insurgents in Yemen. Iran further threatens our allies through funding Hezbollah and Hamas and propping up the regime of Bashar al-Assad, who continues to slaughter his own people. While no one knows for sure how Iran will spend the signing bonus it receives from sanctions relief, the regime's prior behavior provides the best evidence of how it will act in the future. I hear the argument that Iran's, the country has, the internal infrastructure of the country, because of the sanctions and because of the lack of economic activity, has fallen into disrepair. Yet we have to look that Iran is still funding terrorist activity while allowing their own country's infrastructure to become failed and compromised What makes us think that with a new flush $150 billion of a signing bonus, what makes us think that Iran's going to change their priorities all of a sudden? I personally have trouble with that. Finally, I'm worried that the decision to lift the embargo on conventional arms and ballistic missiles sold to Iran will allow Iran to present a greater threat to their neighbors. In addition, it could precipitate a military buildup in the region, which would in turn increase volatility in an already volatile region. Despite these questions and concerns, the administration has argued that our only options are to accept the deal or to go with war with Iran. To accept this binary choice is to say that the American people should accept this deal, regardless of how one-sided it may be, in order to avoid a military conflict with Iran. As a newspaper in my state, the Charleston Gazette-Mail, editorialized just yesterday, this argument, and I quote, paints a simplistic picture that allows its proponents to gloss over the very real problems with this deal, end quote. The Gazette-Mail continues after that, quote, the deal's many critics have consistently made the case that there are other possible paths. The problem is that this administration doesn't want to take them, end quote. Even the president's top general agrees that this is a false proposition. Just this morning, when asked if the choice was binary, accept the Iran agreement or go to war, General Martin Dempsey, our chair of the Joint Chiefs, said, and I quote, we have a range of options and I always present them, end quote. All of us would prefer a diplomatic solution in Iran, but a good agreement with Iran is one that will truly cut off Iran's path to a nuclear weapon and improve the security situation in the Middle East. The sanctions passed by this Congress, together with the sanctions that were built in concert with our foreign allies over the course of a decade, were what brought Iran to the negotiating tables in the first place. These sanctions should be kept in place and strengthened until Iran is forced to accept a deal that actually makes the region safer. I believe with the leverage provided by sanctions, a better deal is possible, and I am not alone. A CNN poll released just yesterday found that 52% of the American people want Congress to reject this deal, while only 44% believe the agreement should be approved. A majority of Americans didn't say they oppose this agreement because they want war with Iran. Absolutely not. Instead, the poll reveals that a majority of Americans want a better deal, one that cuts off Iran's path to a nuclear weapon and makes the Middle East more secure. There are legitimate arguments on both sides of this debate about the Iran deal. I accept that the president and his administration truly believe that the deal that they have negotiated is in America's best interest. But the claim that those who have a different view want war with Iran, it is an inappropriate attempt to short-circuit the legislative debate about this agreement. Congress must stand up against a threat to national security and ensure that a monumental agreement contains the necessary verification and enforcement measurements to protect future generations from a nuclear Iran. I stand with all our allies in the regions who have put their trust in America to negotiate a deal that will protect them indefinitely from the threat of Iranian nuclear weapons. The posterity of our nation and our allies depends on the critical policy decisions made by this Congress and this administration. Now is the time to carefully consider the nature of Iran's threat towards Israel and America, the history of Iranian-funded terrorism, and the consequences of nuclear proliferation in the Middle East. America does not have to accept a bad deal.